Have you ever felt really good about the progress that you're making in whatever goal that you have, and then something happens and you tell yourself, I'm just moving backwards? Like a curveball comes out of nowhere. You have an emergency during the week, your calendar can't be followed, or you get a review from a partner that was less than stellar and it was less than what you expected. Or maybe you own your own practice and you didn't meet a revenue goal where you've been hitting it time and again, and then suddenly one month you didn't hit it. And you tell yourself that you're moving backwards, that it's not possible. So I want you to know something. This is 100% normal. Now, I have experienced having this thought many times, and my clients experience it even when they are killing it month after month with their goals. So, we're going to dig into this belief in this episode, and I'm going to show you how to recover from it. Before we do, if you have been thinking about working with me, I have something really special that I want to share with you. I have a client who we actually did a great session on talking about some lies that were happening in her brain and me doing some coaching showing her where her brain was lying. And this is something we talk about a lot in this podcast, and I'm going to talk about it more in this episode. But if you've been interested in working with me and you want to see what a coaching session is like, my client let me record this session and I get to share it with you. So if you go to dinacataldo.com/coaching session, what's going to happen is you can sign up and watch that video. And when you do, this is what I want you to do. I want you to listen to the video in its entirety. My client says a little something at the end about coaching that you'll want to hear, and then book a call with me. So you'll have questions. Bring those questions to our call, and then I'll be able to answer them for you. So go to dinacataldo.com/coaching session, and you can download that session right now. All right, so let's dig into this week's episode. As you probably know, the brain skews negative, and it's our job to see what's happening and remind ourselves that it lies. If we don't do this, it can spiral and do things like drop using our calendar completely, even if we know it's helpful, think we should be leaving our current office or leaving the law, or that it's not possible to promote, and then give up trying completely. Or we might be thinking that we're doing something wrong. So we start changing things in our business, like our niche, right? We start changing how we're marketing, and then our brain becomes really busy doing all of the things and changing all of the things, even though those things were working. So, recognizing these things is going to help us get back on to the path of problem solving to get what we want, rather than believing our brain when it tells us we're moving backwards. Because none of the thoughts that I just mentioned before, none of them are going to give you the result that you want, because the brain is focused on the wrong problem. You're not actually moving backwards, you're peeling a layer. I want you to think about the Tootsie Pops. Do you remember Tootsie Pops? So in the commercial back in the day, there was an owl that would crunch into this Tootsie Pop to get the bubblegum center. And for us humans, we need to lick and suck on the Tootsie Pop for a while to get the prize in the middle. So think about your goal as being the gumball center of that Tootsie Pop. If you abandon licking the Tootsie Pop, you're not going to get the gumball. If you abandon your calendar because your brain tells you that it's not working, you're not going to achieve your goal to learn how to manage your mind around time and create more of it, to organize your brain around the calendar. If you abandon your dream of making partner because your brain tells you that it's not working, you're not going to achieve your goal, right? You tell yourself things like, well, maybe I should be working harder and that I'm not working hard enough. But that's not the problem solution that your brain needs to be working on. It needs to look for the most impactful actions for yourself. And then if you abandon the work that you've done so far, growing your practice, you won't recognize just the tiny tweaks that can help you and make your life harder than it needs to be by changing everything up. And I have experienced these things many times, right? These are things I'm going to talk about a little bit later in the podcast, some of the common ways I see these things show up with my clients and how you could start redirecting your brain to help you problem solve and start thinking differently than that you're moving backwards. Okay, so when this happens, right, when my brain goes there, and I want you to remember this, our brains, our human brains, they are going to have thoughts that aren't helpful. It's our job just to watch our brain, slow it down so we can see it. That's some of the work I do with my clients. But you can do this too if you start paying attention to this particular podcast around these sentences in our brain. So if you have a sentence in your brain that says, I'm moving backwards, you can recognize it and say, oh, that's just a sentence in my brain. It doesn't mean that it's true. It's just something that I'm thinking. This is true about every single thought. Every thought that we have is just a sentence in our brain. It doesn't mean that it is true. In fact, I'm going to tell you 100% of the time, if somebody comes to me and tells me that they're moving backwards, I am going to be able to cross-examine that thought, and I'm going to be able to show them exactly why their brain is lying to them and how it's lying to them. Okay, so now when it happens to me, I've trained my brain to recognize that in this moment, this is the moment I'm going to experience the most growth. Like when I have a thought like this, I can use it to grow. Because it's going to suck for a little bit, right? Because I'm going to have some feelings about whatever result I got. Like if I didn't meet a revenue goal, if I, didn't achieve the outcome that I wanted, I'm going to feel disappointed. But that's okay. When we think about what growth looks like, we have the misconception in our society that it's all supposed to be like a straight line up on the graph, right? You ever see those graphs? And it's just like zoom, go straight up. That is not reality. What really happens, right, is that there's like picture a graph where there's like zigzag lines up and down, and just they indicate your progress. And the general trajectory is up. But your brain only sees the moment when the line shifts downwards. Okay. In that moment, your brain sees it go downwards and it has the automatic response of skewing negative. It's a protective mechanism. So if your brain doesn't get out of that trajectory, you will not achieve the outcomes that you want. And the lawyers who work with me get out of that downward trajectory faster than if they weren't being coached because they have a second pair of eyes seeing what's happening objectively. And when we're not objective, and it's so hard to be objective when these things are happening to us because we're just so close to it. We can't see it. All we see is the downward slope. We don't see the upward trajectory overall. We just see that moment in time where we're going downhill, right? And that's why it's so easy to think like, oh, we're moving backwards. And I was thinking about how the media uses our brain's tendency to skew negative and only see like that downward slope to grab our attention, right? You probably already know the news headlines are there to grab our attention, right? If they grab our attention, then they have marketing eyes on the commercial. But every commercial that we see is the same way, right? So if we get this new car, then you're going to look so cool, right? We'll have an outside thing, something outside of ourselves that's going to put us on an upward trajectory. If you get this new outfit, then you're going to finally look like you belong in the office, right? We only see the downward trajectory. That new outfit is showing us an upward trajectory, right? If you get this new drug, then you won't have to feel bad. So in that moment, if you're experiencing some downward trajectory, our brain is going to skew negative. It's going to only see the down slope of that trajectory. And then if we get a drug, well, that's just going to put us back up, right? Recognizing that the marketers use this, they see what's happening in the brain, and they know that we want the quick fix, right? Mindset work is not a quick fix, but it is a long-term project for ourselves where we are growing ourselves and we are able to see all the tricks that our brain plays so that we don't fall into the downward trajectory trap. Okay, so there's a couple things I want you to take away from this. Okay, first, life is 50-50 no matter where you are. We are human. So, you having the perfectly managed calendar, the partner position, the consistent income, it doesn't mean anything about who you are. It doesn't make you better than other people. It doesn't mean that you belong. It doesn't mean that you will be more happy. Okay, why not? Because we don't get to opt out of the human experience. You could have everything you want and still be unhappy. And that's because what we believe about ourselves doesn't change when we have the thing that we want. We need to change the beliefs we have about ourselves now so that no matter whether we have the thing we want or not, we're still proud of ourselves and how we're living our lives, right? So if we have the thing, the partnership, does that mean that we are suddenly happier? No, because we still have other things to contend with, right? We have a calendar to contend with. We have politics to contend with. We have teams to contend with. We've got to like manage our mind around all of that. And if in this moment you're not managing your mind, you will not be able to manage your mind when you're there, right? The grass is not greener. That's why it's so important to do the work on ourselves now so that when we achieve what we want, it's going to feel so natural because, of course, we've been doing it all along. Okay, the second thing I want you to take away from this is that if we think the thought that we're moving backwards, we might have emotions like frustration and anger, but those feelings do not tell the whole story. Those emotions tend to be the surface emotions that mask feelings of inadequacy, disappointment, despair, and shame, self doubt, all those things. And if we don't see that, if we cannot see those feelings, then we cannot address them, we cannot process them. We can't see what's happening there. We cannot see those emotions unless we start questioning all the thoughts that our brain gives us. And that's one of the things I work on with my clients is we get nuanced about what they're feeling. Okay. The nuance helps us understand the mindset that is creating their results. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but our brain is not us. Our brain might be inside of our skull, but it feeds us all kinds of garbage when we don't manage it. And if you've been listening for a while, you might notice that our brain comes up with a bunch of nonsense and we usually believe it. The nonsense can sabotage what we want if we're not looking for the garbage thoughts. And if we're looking or we're thinking that we're moving backwards, then we let the garbage thoughts take over. Right? Thoughts start popping up like, it's not working. I can't do this. This isn't possible. These thoughts bring up those feelings of disappointment, hopelessness, shame that we talked about. And I want you to remember that we are where our attention is. So if our attention is on that downward slope of the trajectory rather than looking at the overall upward trajectory of the graph, then we're not going to see the bigger picture. We're not going to keep going. We're not going to keep wanting to do the work because we're not paying attention to the fact that what we're doing is working. If we're focused on how it will never work, we're going to block ourselves from finding the answers to make it work. If we're focused on how we can't do something, we will ensure that we never do it. Here's a common thought model I see that lawyers get into when it comes to their calendar. I'll do it with the other examples I gave too. So you see how believing that you're moving backwards can sabotage your progress forwards. They want to feel less overwhelm and stress at the office. So they decide they're going to try a calendar system. They try one system. Then after a couple of weeks, they think that system doesn't work. So they try another one. Then that doesn't work after a couple of weeks. Then they stop trying to make a calendar system work for them because they think that it's the calendar that's the problem instead of looking at how they think about their calendar and their time. Maybe they find a system that they like for a week, but then they skip a week and they tell themselves that they just can't do it. They feel like it's hopeless, so they give up and figure that being a lawyer is just overwhelming and stressful, and there's nothing they can do about it. Their brain goes into the past to dig up all the reasons that they're right. It tells them things like, you've never done it before, you tried it and it just didn't work. I just haven't found the right system. The right system doesn't exist. I've never found it. I'm never going to find it. It's not their fault that their brain skews this way. No one teaches us how to examine our thoughts for lies and to ignore thoughts that are past focused. Because if we didn't do it in the past, the evidence that we didn't do it in the past is not going to help us do it in the future. We need a new perspective and new thoughts to help us move the needle forward. And one of the things that I do with my clients that works really well is not having them upend their whole life with their calendar. They just make small tweaks and start building their self trust and self confidence when it comes to managing their time. So, for instance, we might look at one particular day that's consistently rough for them and we deconstruct what's happening. I ask them questions that help them problem solve to make that day easier. And it always comes down to how they're thinking about that day or one or more of the tasks happening that day. Or I have them pick one part of the day that feels stressful to them, and we reimagine what that part of the day could look like and how they want it to look. Sometimes it's like partner meetings, sometimes it's, just conference calls that they have all day long. It could be any number of things. I did this particular practice with my mornings. My mornings were super hectic. I hated how I felt getting ready for the office. And I was focusing my attention on that horrible feeling. But then I realized that I could change things. So I focused my attention just on my mornings and how I could play with what I did to make my mornings better. I didn't look to my past to see what I hadn't done before. I just kept asking myself what I wanted to feel and asked myself how I could create that. I didn't take my eye off the ball. Even if I didn't wake up consistently, even if I wasn't doing things that I wanted to do on those mornings, I didn't tell myself it wasn't possible. I didn't look to my past and say, oh, I've never done it before. I'm never going to do it. I just said, no, I'm going to figure this out. And that was the thought that I had. I can figure this out. That's a really great go-to thought for anybody who wants to change something in their life. When it comes to making partner and you get a less than stellar review, or even not making your revenue or your hourly goal in your practice, it's also really easy to let your brain go to the thought that you're moving backwards or you can't figure it out. So this is a thought model I see in this particular case, right? They think they can't figure it out or that they can't make any progress. Then they feel frustrated or angry. But then, really, underneath that frustration and anger is disappointment or despair or shame. And then they don't problem solve in a way that assumes that they can have what they want. They ignore all the ways that what they are currently doing is actually working for them. So then they stop doing the things that are working for them, like asking for the critique on their writing or asking for membership or doing their marketing. And instead they think about changing their practice area or upending their lives in some way. And the result is that they block themselves from figuring out how to get what they want. And you can see some of the pitfalls of believing that you're moving backwards when I 100% know that if you're thinking that thought, your brain is lying to you, right? So here's what I will offer to you if you are having this thought that you're moving backwards. So number one, look at all the ways where you are not moving backwards. Look at all the places where you're getting your work done, where you're showing up as the attorney that you want to be, and where you know you've improved as an attorney. Really look at them, write them all down. Remind yourself, this is number two, remind yourself that you can figure anything out. I'm going to link to a problem solving episode I did in the show notes. And if you want to help your mind get super specific so it can help you problem solve, you're going to want to listen to that episode. And number three, ask for help. If you truly believe that you are moving backwards, ask someone with an objective perspective to evaluate your work, evaluate what's happening in your life. Ask someone you feel comfortable with asking. Of course, you don't want to just, talk to anybody. I can help you with this work. You'll get fresh eyes on what's happening in your life by a lawyer who's experienced what you've experienced and who's a certified coach who can help you problem solve the answers you need to get the outcomes that you want. You can go to dinacataldo.com/strategy session to book a call. All right, my friend, thank you for listening. This was a fun episode. I will talk to you soon. Bye.